It is time for the official college football ACC record predictions video. I'm going to go through all 17 team schedules, dissect them, and give you the exact win total for these teams. So we're doing this under 25 minutes is the goal. Rapid fire record predictions. Our first team is Virginia, and they bring in Bo Pribula and Eli Holsting from Pittsburgh and Missouri. Their quarterback room is loaded this season. They have Rico Flores Jr. at receiver and Peyton Lewis in the backfield. This offense could score 35 points per game and once again make the ACC title game for the second straight season. It starts off week 0 against NC State. Virginia wins this game week 0, and then they play 9-11 Friday night against FCS Norfolk State. They win that game. They beat West Virginia. They're 3-0. They beat Delaware. They're 4-0. And I think starting October here, their first loss comes in Tallahassee on the road to Florida State. So they fall to 4-1. They beat Syracuse in a fun back and forth game there. High scoring. They're 5-1. They lose at SMU. Kevin Jennings. That's a tough game there in Texas. So they're 5-2. We'll say they beat Duke this year in a revenge game. 6-2. And I think they might lose at Wake Forest in an upset there. So 6-3. And I think they might lose to Cal as well. Cal's defense could slow this team down. We'll say 6-4, and they beat North Carolina, and I think they beat Virginia Tech this season. I'm saying 8-4. That could be a bit low, honestly. I would not be shocked if this team does win 9-10 games. I just think their defense has holes in it. The offense is fine. They should score 30-plus per game. I'm going to say 8-4. That's conservative. But I would not be surprised if this team wins 9 or 10 games and maybe gets back to the ACC championship once again. Going to SMU, I love this team, guys. Experience. Kevin Jennings at quarterback. They have an upgraded defense, guys. Their secondary is better this season. They're not going to allow 40 points per game. This team is a legit contender to win the ACC, but their first game is Monday night at Florida State. That's brutal. Unfortunately, a loss there, and they start 0-1. But after that, things get easier. They beat UC Davis. We'll say they beat Louisville on the road. They're 2-1. They beat Missouri State. They beat Boston College. And Virginia, obviously. They beat California at home. And they win against Syracuse. And they beat Virginia Tech. They're, 8-1 now? This schedule's pretty easy for SMU, really. Obviously, at Notre Dame in November, that's likely a loss. And then against Stanford, I believe this team has the makings to go 10-2. And their only losses to Florida State and Notre Dame. Now, is that enough for the playoff? I think they need to win the ACC title game to make the playoff. I know 2 years ago they lost that game and still made it. I just don't see the wins on this schedule without that win in the title game. You're talking 10 wins, with your best wins being against Louisville and Virginia. It's not going to be enough, guys. This team needs 11 wins to make the playoff. Going to Pittsburgh here, they lose production this year on offense. Pat Narduzzi's team. And I guess Mason Heinschel is the quarterback here, his sophomore year. This team's going to be okay, I think above average slightly. They beat Miami. They beat UCF. They beat Syracuse, beat Bucknell. So boom, just like that, they're 4-0. I think they lose at Virginia Tech. They beat North Carolina. They definitely lose to Miami and Georgia Tech. And they lose to Florida State. And probably at Louisville too. I'm sorry to say, guys, I'm seeing 7-5, which is kind of the same as last year. I think the ceiling's probably 8 wins for this team. It's going to be a slight step back this year for Pittsburgh on offense. I think they beat the teams they should, but the losses come Miami, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Louisville, and then either Cal or Virginia Tech. So I'm seeing 7-5 for Pittsburgh this season. Boston College, Bill O'Brien. This program's a disaster, guys. 30 players left to the transfer portal last season. It is going to get ugly. They lose to Cincinnati. They might beat Rutgers. Honestly, I think they lose to Rutgers. They beat Maine. They lose to VT. They lose to SMU. They lose to Pittsburgh. The only wins I see on this schedule are probably going to be at home against Syracuse and then Maine. I'm going to say right now 3-9. and that could be generous, honestly. 3-9 is probably a stretch. The Clemson Tigers, everyone hates on this team for not doing well in the transfer portal, but they did retool this season on defense. And guys, they're bringing in 4-star quarterback Tate Reynolds. I don't see him starting the season, but I believe he comes in October, kind of like Trevor Lawrence did that one year. Freshman sensation Tate Reynolds will lead this team to a great season. They do lose at LSU. They beat Georgia Southern. They beat North Carolina. They beat Cal. I think they even beat Miami at home in a shock upset there. They beat Charleston Southern. They beat Virginia Tech. They might lose on Halloween at Florida State. That is probably a night game there. They beat Syracuse. They beat Georgia Tech. And they win out the rest of the way. I'm seeing a 10-2 season for Clemson this year, assuming Tate Reynolds comes in and plays at least 8 games. Defensive-wise, they hold teams under 25 points per game. And yes, they start 0-1, and they win 10 games of their last 11. And Clemson goes to the ACC title game in 2026, and maybe even a playoff berth this season. Stay tuned, guys. If Tate Reynolds plays, come back to this video and thank me. I told you so. This team goes from 7-6 to maybe a playoff berth this season. North Carolina. I mean, what do you say here, guys? Bobby Petrino at OC, Bill Belichick, Jordan. I mean, this team's more ran through than the Desperate Housewives. It's ridiculous. So, who's their quarterback this season? I think right now it's a 4-way race at quarterback. It's a mess down there, guys. It's a total reality show right now in Chapel Hill. Last year was 4-8. This year they lose to TCU, week 0. They beat Eastern Tennessee State. I think they beat UConn and maybe even NC State in that last week. I'm going to say right now 4-8 again. I don't see more than 4 wins on this schedule. If you do, let me know, but I just don't see the wins here. They're going to lose to Notre Dame by 30. This is going to get ugly once again for North Carolina. Wow. Stanford football. So they lose Frank Reich. They keep Andrew Luck as GM this season. They have Davis Warren at quarterback. This team has potential to win 6 games and go to a bowl this season. Can we find 6 games on this schedule? I think they squeak one out week 0 against Hawaii. They lose to Miami. They lose at Duke. They lose to Georgia Tech. Oh boy. They lose at Wake. They lose at Notre Dame. So they're, 1-5 now? They beat Elon. Why are they playing against Elon in mid-October? I have no idea. So that's 2 wins already. I think they could beat NC State. That's a coin flip right there. Let's say they do, and that's 3 wins already. But maybe they beat Virginia Tech. And then the last 2 weeks of the year, they're going to be big underdogs in the game against Cal. And then at home against SMU. This is tough, guys. I'm going to say 5-7. That is probably pushing it for this team. I think there's 2 wins on here for sure against Hawaii and Elon. They can beat VT. They can beat Wake maybe and NC State. But honestly, 5-7 is probably ambitious there. So I'm going to say no bowl game for the Cardinal this year. And then going to Wake Forest. I love this first game on Thursday night. Wake versus Akron. It's going to be the dark blue and the black and the gold game. It's beautiful. And the next week at Purdue, so black and gold again, is going to be a beautiful game there to watch. This team last year surprised. 9 wins. Nobody saw that coming. Now they lose Claiborne to the draft at running back. He went to the Minnesota Vikings this season. But they bring in Gio Lopez at quarterback. He's going to be solid. And this offense should be good once again. I think they win those first 2 games of the season. And they lose to Miami and Louisville. We'll say they beat Stanford, I guess. That's 3 wins. They beat NC State, lose to Cal. They beat Virginia, and they beat Merrimack. I guess that's 6 wins already. But here, things get tough in November. They lose at SMU. They lose at Georgia Tech, and they lose to Duke. I'm going to say 6-6, which honestly is a solid season for this Wake program. They go to a bowl game, and we'll take that if you're a Wake Forest fan. I'm not sure if Wake Forest fans actually exist. If they do, please tell me. I'm going to say 6-6. Watch them get their pitchforks out now and start coming at me. That would be insane. The Syracuse Orange. Steve Angeli's back this year at quarterback. after the horrific injury last season. And they're playing New Hampshire week 1. That's a 55-point win against New Hampshire Hamsters. But this defense is really bad, and I don't see this team improving at all in the ACC this season. They lose to Cal. They lose to Pittsburgh. I think they lose to UConn this season too. UConn's much improved now. That's not your father's UConn team. They're legit. So Syracuse is 1-3. They lose to Virginia. They lose to Louisville. They could beat North Carolina on the road. It's a coin flip right now. They lose to SMU, lose to Clemson, lose to North Carolina State. I'm going to say 2-10. That's abysmal, I know. There's one guaranteed win here, and it's versus New Hampshire. Other than that, this team is probably underdogs in every game they play this season. I do hope Angeli comes back this season and plays well. I just don't see this team winning many games. I'm going 2-10. Georgia Tech. Oh, we got Mendoza back. Alberto Mendoza. Brent Key's offense will be good once again. This team is always so much fun to watch. They reload after a good season last year. This team is shooting for 8-9 wins. So here we go. They beat Colorado week 1 on that Thursday night primetime game, ESPN. They lose to Tennessee. They beat Mercer by 48. They beat Stanford as well. I think they lose to Duke, and they beat Virginia Tech, beat Boston College. We'll say they lose at Pittsburgh. They beat Louisville. They lose at Clemson. They beat Wake Forest. And then a Saturday, November 28th against Georgia. That's once again a neutral site game. They were in that game, especially 2 years ago. And then last year, they held Georgia's offense in check. They were in that game. It was low scoring, ugly. Realistically, there's probably a 20% chance that Georgia Tech beats Georgia. But I'm going to say 8-4 this season. It is a very tough schedule this year, playing Clemson and Georgia and Colorado, Tennessee. That is brutal. I think 8-4 is the ceiling. And because they have Mendoza, and guys, he was there with Indiana. They went 16-0. You got to win at least 8 games this season. Yes, trust Mendoza to win at least 8 games this year in Georgia Tech. The Miami Hurricanes, the runner-up, they were one drive away from winning the national championship. An unbelievable run in the playoffs, beating Texas A&M, beating Ohio State, beating Ole Miss, some of the best teams in college football. Now, yes, they lose Carson Beck, the nutcracker, but Darian Mensah from Duke, he is legit, guys. Darian Mensah, he led a very average Duke team to an ACC title. He's going to be a Heisman contender this season, and I'm seeing this team back in the playoffs once again, but they must win at least 10 games. They're loaded. Malachi Toney's back. Fletcher Jr., Brown, Pringle in the backfield. So the beginning of their season is very strange. They play Friday night at Stanford, and then Thursday evening against Florida A&M, and then Friday night at Wake Forest. So there's no Saturday games until the 26th of September against Central Michigan. I believe they win those first 4 games of the year, and then at Clemson, it's going to be a night game, October 3rd. I think Clemson could win that game. It's kind of a coin flip right now. And then Florida State, they beat them. They beat Pittsburgh. I think they beat North Carolina by 40, and they lose at Notre Dame. And then they beat Duke, Virginia Tech, and Boston College. So as of right now, I am seeing 10-2 for this team with losses to Notre Dame and Clemson, and they beat Florida State. They beat Pittsburgh. I think this team has enough to make the playoff. They will make the ACC title game in this situation unless they lose to Clemson and Florida State, or Clemson and Pittsburgh maybe. That's unlikely. I think this team wins 10 games minimum, and they go back to the college football playoff regardless of the ACC championship outcome. And then going to the Duke Blue Devils, our defending ACC champions. They bring in Walker Eggett from San Jose State, a really good Mountain West quarterback. He's legit, but this team is due for a step back after winning the conference last season. Of course, Darian Mensah leaves. They beat Tulane. They lose at Illinois. They beat Stanford. They beat William and Mary. I think they lose at Georgia Tech. They beat North Carolina by 20. That Friday night game at Virginia is going to be tough. I think Virginia wins that game. They beat Boston College. They lose at NC State and at Miami. And they lose to Clemson. So right now I'm saying 6-6. It is definitely a regression year, but I think this team still makes a bowl game with a solid offense. And then the California Golden Bears, the furthest west ACC school. This team is very, very transfer heavy this season, so it's really unknown how good they're going to be, but the defense should be once again solid. I'm not going to go through every game on the schedule because this team is really unknown roster-wise, but I'm going to say 7-5, which is solid. I think the floor is 5-7 for this team, and the ceiling is probably 7-8 wins. So I'll be nice today and give them 7 wins. That is California. And then Virginia Tech. So they got Grunkemeyer coming in as quarterback, transferring in to try to fix this ship because last year was a disaster down here, 3-9. Now the schedule sets up well for this team. Virginia Military, Old Dominion, Maryland, they could win that game too. After that, things get tough. They lose to Pitt, they lose to Cal, they lose to Georgia Tech. I think they could maybe beat Stanford. Honestly, the ceiling for this team is 6-6. I'll be very, very generous here and say 6-6, but even that's pushing it. I would take the under on their win total. If it's 5.5, I would still take the under. I think their best route to 6 wins this season is starting 4-0 and then beating Stanford and Virginia at home. I think their best route to 6 wins here is starting 4-0 and then beating Stanford and Virginia at home. That's the best case scenario, though, for this team. And then going to Louisville, they bring in Lincoln Kleinholz from Ohio State, a very good prospect at quarterback. This team's offense should be really good under Jeff Brom once again. 8 wins last year. Let's shoot for at least 8 wins this season. So that first Sunday night game against Ole Miss, I think they lose that game because Ole Miss should be really good this year. They beat Villanova. They could beat SMU, and they beat Wake Forest, and they beat NC State, so they're 4-1 already. They lose to Florida State. They beat Syracuse. They beat Stanford. I think they lose at Georgia Tech. They beat North Carolina. The Pittsburgh game's a toss-up, and they beat Kentucky. I'm going to say 8-4. This team could go 9-3. If Lincoln Kleinholz plays well, they could be a 9-win team. I don't think they're quite good enough to make the ACC title game this year, but 9 wins is definitely reasonable. I'll be conservative and say 8-4 here because there's a chance this team starts 1-2 in those first 3 weeks. And then Florida State. So right now, it looks like Ashton Daniels is going to be the quarterback, but Castellanos might come back. The NCAA just announced that if a player comes back for the 5th year, they have to stay at the school they were at. They can't transfer to a different school. In that case, if Tommy Castellanos comes back, he is playing for Florida State once again. That would be insane to see. But Mike Norvell's team has plenty of roster changes this season. The transfer portal was hit hard, so it's largely unknown right now if this team's going to be legit. Of course, last year, beating Alabama week 1 and then finishing 5-7, so who knows? They lose to Alabama. We'll say they lose at Louisville in this scenario. They lose at Miami. They lose against Clemson. That is a brutal stretch in October right there. So after October, they fall to 3-5. And then the rest of the way, they beat Boston College. They beat Pittsburgh on the road. They beat NC State. And I think this year, Florida is going to be worse. So they beat Florida on Black Friday at home in Tallahassee. And Florida State finishes 7-5, which is probably being very optimistic here, winning 4 straight to finish off the season. I'll be nice and say 7-5. I think 6-6 is reasonable for this team. Honestly, at this point, just make a bowl game and call it a win. And then going to our final victim of the video, it is NC State, led by quarterback CJ Bailey. Another team playing week 0. They lose to Virginia. They beat Richmond. They lose at Vanderbilt. They beat App State, so they're 2-2. I'll say they lose to Louisville. They beat Wake Forest, they're 3-3. At Stanford's a win, 4-3. They beat Cal, 5-3. That Duke game is tough, November 7th. Let's say they lose to Duke, so they're 5-4. And then they beat Syracuse, they're 6-4. They lose at Florida State, and they beat North Carolina in rivalry week. So they finish 7-5, which I think for this team is legitimately good. So guys, if you disagree, put below in the comments and stay tuned for more college football. It is the best time of the year. Peace out. Bye.